Good morning. It's wonderful to see you all here today. I know what was coming up for me during my practice was a lot of energy. I'm sure some of it's nervous, but most of it is just the excitement that I feel having the opportunity to engage with others and supporting each other in this work, because it is work to look deeply at our experience, but to support each other in that and engage in the exchange of ideas around that, I always find very exciting. And I'm also just really excited to be here. This is a very meaningful morning for me because this is the very building where I learned to meditate just over 20 years ago with a lovely gentleman named Ben Worth, who I'm sure many of you know. And if you had asked me then if I ever thought I would be up here giving a Dharma talk, I might have rolled my eyes. I rolled my eyes a lot more back then. And I definitely would have said, no way, absolutely not. And so that just goes to show that we never know how our paths are going to unfold. And I think that's actually a beautiful thing. And I want to give a special thanks to Victor for inviting me to be here this morning and have this very meaningful experience. And so what I want to share today is just one little piece of that journey that's unfolded for me. One of many things that I have learned, sometimes willingly, sometimes with a little bit of struggle along the way. And it's what I like to affectionately call my philosophy of lowered expectations. And so I want to ask you just to take a moment to check in. If I say that phrase, lowered expectations, what comes up for you? Do you have kind of a response to that? Maybe you sense some kind of connotation with that phrase. I know for me, I have a sort of negative connotation. I think of lowered expectations, I think of giving up, settling for less, letting go of achievement focus, which, let's face it, Western culture, that's really important. And in some other cultures too. Sometimes we get a little bit of a bad rap for it, but it's out there. So I want to flip that script a little bit and give you a different phrase, actually several different phrases, that are actually synonyms, but may have a different resonance with you. So if I say the words acceptance, openness, receptivity, equanimity, check in. What kind of response comes up for you? What kind of connotation do you have with those words? For me, I generally have a positive response to those words because those are words that I think of when I'm engaging with the world and I feel that the world is accepting what I'm putting forth and that I'm accepting what the world is offering me, that someone is open to my ideas and I'm open to their ideas. And so I have a lot of positive feelings around those words. But I'm here today to offer the suggestion that lowered expectations is just another way of saying increased acceptance, increased equanimity. And that is a pretty fundamental thing in this work that we're doing to understand ourselves and to understand the world. And what brought me in the doors here over 20 years ago, I'm sure is something that most of you can relate to, and that was I was looking for answers to a particular question, and that was, how can I reduce suffering? And at the time, it was primarily my own. I was actually dealing with a lot of emotional and physical turmoil around disordered eating, and I've since found much healing in that area, but that question is still there for me, and that is, how do we reduce suffering? And so I'm not so much focused on just my own suffering anymore, but just how can we reduce it in the entire world around us? And so I think that this piece, this lowered expectation idea, is pretty fundamental in that quest for the reduction of suffering. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Hopefully, your direct experience is starting to point you in that direction as well. And there are some other teachers who talk about this a lot, in the importance of lowered expectations and increased acceptance. One of those teachers, full disclosure, Shinzen Young, is a teacher that I study with, and he likes to put this in a sort of mathematical formula. And that formula is that pain, which we could also call discomfort, it doesn't have to be dramatic, it could be subtle sometimes. So pain multiplied by resistance equals suffering. So the discomfort itself is just an experience, right? It's neutral in and of itself. But when we spend a lot of energy trying to make it something it isn't, that's the resistance piece. And that's actually a lot of times what's creating our suffering. And so the image I like to use to make this more real for me is if we think of our experience, positive or negative, it could be comfortable or uncomfortable, but think of it like waves coming in on the ocean. And we can walk into that ocean and we can stand there and we can shout at the waves and point at them and say, you know what, waves, today you really shouldn't be this high. You shouldn't be this rough. Or you really should be a little calmer. And we can hold up our hand and we can try and stop those waves. And I think we can all see where this gets us. It wears us out. Maybe we get knocked down. We've spent a lot of breath and energy trying to change something that we have no control over, that we're not going to change. And that holding up our hand against the waves, that shouting at the waves to be something different than they are, that's the resistance piece. And that getting worn out, that's the suffering that we're creating unnecessarily a lot in our life. And one of the ways that we often create that resistance is through expectations, right? We expect the waves to be different. We want them to conform to a different idea than the reality is at that moment. And this is so important. There's another teacher, John Yates, who is a retired neuroscientist as well, and he talks about how important this is for an individual meditation session, knowing this concept and being aware of it, and kind of putting ourselves on guard for these expectations. And John Yates is known to many, I forgot to mention this, as Chuladasa. And so he wrote a book called The Mind Illuminated, which attempts to kind of bring this Western neuroscience perspective to what we know through Buddhist and many other spiritual traditions, through millennia of trial and error, to be true. And he talks about, at the beginning of every formal meditation that we do, it's really useful to check in with those expectations, because they can really lead us into a lot of wasted energy and spinning our wheels. And so I want to give you a couple of things to look for, to watch out for, to let you know that expectations might be creeping into your practice or just into your daily life when you're out bopping around. And these are based on a little bit more my own direct experience. I also struggle with a functional digestive disorder, irritable bowel syndrome, and that can be very unpredictable, can be very painful, kind of like rough ocean waves. I don't always have a lot of control over it. And so I've noticed these kind of three different areas where expectations tend to lead me into a very unproductive negativity loop whenever I'm having discomfort around that issue. And one of the first ways that I'm sure we're all familiar with is physical tension, right? Many times if we have emotional or physical discomfort, there is a physical response. We're gripping and holding, trying to tamp it down or control it or keep it from spreading in some way. And another way to think about that is like kind of, you've got a boiling lid and you're trying to hold that lid, a boiling pot, and you're trying to hold that lid on there to keep everything from spilling over. But the problem is that pressure is going to build no matter what. And so actually it can be more effective to take off the lid and let that steam dissipate, right? So it can actually be more productive to let go of the physical tension and just acknowledge that that discomfort is really there. And so that's one flag to look for, the expectations may be creeping into your experience. Another one is, in particular, mental dialogue, but sometimes we start saying it out loud. That's like the shouting at the waves. Waves, you shouldn't be so big today. And really the red flag here is the word should in any form, right? Things should or shouldn't be different. For me, that'll be, oh, I should be feeling better by now, right? This flare-up has been lasting for too long. It should be done. Or I shouldn't be having this right now. This isn't a good time. So that listening for that mental dialogue, especially with that word should, can also be a pointer to expectations that are creeping up and that maybe we might be able to lower a little bit, relieve some suffering, some pressure. And the last one I'll give you a tip to look out for is what I affectionately call the comparison slideshow, which is for me often like this mental montage of other people, usually very happy, healthy, maybe wealthy, beautiful, whatever it is that I'm not feeling at this particular moment. I'm having a slideshow or a movie of them being the opposite, doing all the things I can't do, feeling all the things I feel like I'm never going to feel again. So it could be a visual experience, right? We're playing this kind of movie of what we want our life to be, but that it isn't right now in this particular moment. So being able to let go of that comparison montage and look at the right now, the here, and see what it really is can again help us let go of some of that pressure and stop shouting at the waves. So again, I'm kind of pointing towards this idea that this idea of acceptance, of equanimity, and raising the equanimity, raising the openness, and lowering the expectations, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the idea of relieving suffering. And one thing that excites me a lot right now is that we have this technology of meditation, which has been developed through millennia, perhaps billions, I'm not sure how to make this estimate, but many hours of humans experimenting and trying over and over, exploring their inner experience. And we've got this technology that through all that hard work has been developed that we know works pretty darn well to release suffering. But there's this newer technology that humans have developed, and that's the idea of scientific discovery, right? Where we can be more strategic. And there is sometimes some trial and error that goes into it, but it can help us identify things in a more efficient way than perhaps we have been able to. And these two technologies are starting to meet more and more, and really pointing to some great things. And one of the things that science is starting to confirm is that what we intuitively knew is that acceptance is important in meditation practice and in developing our skills and resilience in the world. And it's starting to show how that mechanism actually works. And you might say, well, we know meditation works. That's enough, isn't it? Right? What else do you need to know? And that's a legitimate viewpoint, right? If it works, great, use it. But that's not always enough for some people. And if we can understand how something works, then perhaps we have the opportunity to take this thing that's already working and make it work even more effectively. Maybe boost it a little bit, or perhaps make it more accessible to more people. And so that could be a net gain, right? Even more ways to effectively reduce suffering in the world. And so there's a particular study that was done there. I mean, there are tons of great studies. If you just want to go out and hit Google Scholar, have fun. You'll be reading for a few weeks, maybe years if you really want. But one particular study that I like a lot because of its simplicity, but also its power, was published in 2017 by a researcher named Emily Lindsay and a large team. She wasn't by herself in this. And she and her team were working from a theory that's been around for almost a decade now, I think, called the monitoring and acceptance theory. And this is based on the idea that when we meditate, we're really training our minds to do two things. These are skills that we are cultivating, and that's great news too, that we can actually cultivate these skills. And so we're training our mind to monitor our live experience as it's unfolding, monitor the here and now, and accept it. So monitor and acceptance theory. And so in 2017, Emily Lindsay and her team published a study called Acceptance Lowers Stress Reactivity. And what they did is they actually were able to isolate these components of monitoring and acceptance, and then they had a control group that learned a kind of different coping mechanism that wasn't related to those two skills. And then they checked in with things that we know are biological markers of stress, like cortisol levels or heart rate. And they published this. If you're wanting to get the full sense of how all these different things are relating, the name of the journal is Psychoneuroendocrinology. So they're really looking at this from a lot of different perspectives. And this study showed that yes, indeed, the one piece that made a difference, the most difference, that lowered the cortisol and lowered the heart rate and contributed to the subjective feeling, right? The personal interpretation of suffering was the acceptance piece. So that's what I want to leave you with today, kind of my own hypothesis related to this, which is that lowered expectations are a good thing. And they're something that we can cultivate, both in our formal meditation practice, but just out in our daily lives. And I encourage you to try this experiment for yourself, and that is by practicing, cultivating this ability to lower your expectations and increase your acceptance. My theory, my hypothesis, is that you will notice, with diligent practice, more happiness and less suffering. Thank you.